Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our second environmental speaker series in partnership with the Niagara Parks and the Environmental Sustainability Research Center at Brock University. We are thrilled to have you all with us here this evening. Before we get started, I just want to say we gratefully acknowledge that we are on the lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous people for millennia. As Canadians, we are thankful for the opportunity to live, work, and play here. We honor and uphold the first environmental agreement, the Dish and One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We thank all who have served and continue to share as stewards in this special place. So tonight, before we get to our keynote speakers for the evening, we are pleased to have one of Brock University's master's students here with us to share a bit of research. Brooke Kapeller, her thesis is Exploring Environmental Stewardship in the Niagara Region of Canada and How do Elements of Environmental Stewardship Relate to Success. This focuses on understanding local environmental stewardship efforts. Specifically, Brooke's investigations sought to illuminate elements of environmental stewardship initiatives and factors making for success. Her study took place in the Niagara region and involved approximately 20 stewardship organizations and highlights findings that are important for future scholarship and practice. So without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Brooke Kapeller.
Thanks, Heather. I'm just going to pop my screen up. Give me 1 second. Okay, can I get confirmation that you can see my screen? Seeing nods, thank you. So hi everybody, as Heather said, my name is Brooke Kapeller. I am a part-time grad student with the ESRC and my research is looking at exploring environmental stewardship in the Niagara Region of Canada, as my dog is shaking beside me. So my research involved working with around 20 different organizations in the area to understand what makes for successful stewardship initiatives and how elements of environmental stewardship play out on the landscape. So the final report that I have produced is in the format of a story map, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with everyone this evening. The story map is not quite public. It'll be released in October, so this is kind of a sneak peek of the results and what the report is going to look like. So I'm just going to go through the report now. So as I said, the research took place in the Niagara region. This map here just shows the boundaries of the study. So everything that was within these boundaries was included. And as you can see, it outlines the Niagara region and the 12 municipalities that are within the area. Some snapshots from the region. Of course, when you're talking about Niagara, you have to include the lovely wineries and Niagara Falls. So the purpose of my research was to advance understanding of local environmental stewardship efforts. And this was done through conducting 2 different studies. So the first study was looking at exploring the context and the elements of environmental stewardship, and the second study was assessing factors of stewardship success. So I'm just going to get right into the results. So study 1, participants were asked to reflect on these 4 contextual factors and how they relate to environmental stewardship in Niagara specifically. So the first factor is the environmental context. And so there's some quotes here from participants. Niagara is one of the last remaining areas of Carolinian forests, and it is very unique in terms of the biodiversity and the geology in the area. So those were common themes that were brought up by research participants. So the next factor is the social cultural context. The area was identified as having a lot of collaboration potential, as well as the public in Niagara being very keen to engage in this type of stewardship work. Next was the political context. At the time of research, the area was undergoing a lot of political changes. So a new provincial government had just been elected, city councils had just been undergone elections. So that was one aspect of it. And then the other aspect that was brought up quite a lot was the relationship between politics and economic development and how that impacts environmental stewardship efforts. And then finally, the economic context. So this was very much tied to economic development and pressure on the landscape and land uses, and how that can kind of conflict with stewardship and conservation values in the area. So participants reported around 90 stewardship initiatives in the region, and those are all mapped out in this map here. If you click on the legend, you can see that many of them are restoration focused, with the rest being preservation, education, and sustainable use focused. So elements of environmental stewardship that people were asked to reflect on were the actors who were involved in the work, their motivations to engage, the capacity to undertake the efforts, actions that were taken, and then ecological and social outcomes. And so the information here was gathered in the form of a survey, and people were asked to repeat the survey and answer information for each of the elements for every single one of their initiatives on the landscape. So that's what's reported here. So each of these charts show the different elements. Let me just center it on my screen. So actors here, individuals, how involved they were in the initiative, groups, organizations, and then the different capacity types are here. So the social capital, cultural, financial, and then how important those are for success. The motivation spurring the initiative to occur. I keep scrolling. And then the types of actions that were undertaken. And so what's really cool about this is that this map here is totally interactive. So if I zoom in, you can see that the charts update based on what the map extent is showing. So say I'm only interested in initiatives that have been undertaken in Niagara Falls. I can zoom into that area, and then these charts will only show the element information for those initiatives. And you can't click on the initiatives themselves in order to respect privacy of some of the organizations. Some of their initiatives weren't public. So you can't click and see whose initiative it is or what was done, but you can see the element information associated with it. And so study 2 was looking at factors that make for stewardship success. So there were about 10 factors that were identified by participants, and those that were discussed by more than 35% of participants are displayed here. So those factors are the actors, the capacity, the motivations, communication and support, longer time frames, politics, and actions. And then each of these have quotes from the participants that I think nicely illustrate what those factors are about. So then the second part of that study was looking at how organization types differ in their perceptions of success. So for each of those 10 factors, what I did was I split them between staff versus volunteer-based organizations to determine whether there was a difference. And so that's what this table here is showing. It shows each of the 10 factors as well as sub-themes that were discussed within those. And so then the coloring here indicates high and low. Red is high, blue is low, as well as the percentage of organizations that discussed each. So some main conclusions from the research. Some common themes that were brought up between the two studies were the importance of collaboration, as well as the importance of monitoring and evaluation efforts. And then other themes that were brought up were political will, having motivated individuals involved, and then the importance of both financial and human capacity. And so I provided some practical recommendations for stewardship work on the ground at the end of the story map here. And so just a brief acknowledgement, I just want to thank all of the organizations who participated in the research. And I know that a lot of the participants are in the audience tonight, so I just want to thank you again for participating. This research really would not have been possible without you. And thank you for attending tonight. I really appreciate all of your support. Yeah, so contact information for myself and Ryan are included here. And then as the thesis is completed and publications are done, they'll also be updated on the story map. And as soon as it is ready to share publicly, it will be shared and you will be made aware of it. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brooke, for sharing your hard-done research with all of us tonight. So we're now going to move on to our keynote presentation. So I'm pleased to introduce our panel that will be discussing environmental stewardship in Niagara. So our moderator for this discussion is Ryan Plummer. Ryan is professor and director of the Environmental Sustainability Research Center at Burant University. He is also presently an adjunct professor in the Sustainability Research Center at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia, and adjunct faculty in the Department of Environment and Resource Studies at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. His research concerns the human-environment relationship, a subject on which he has published extensively in over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles. He is the recipient of a Chancellor's Chair for Research Excellence and was identified in the world's list of most impactful researchers in 2017. I also have the pleasure of introducing our panelists from Niagara Parks. So we have Ellen Savoia and Corey Burant. Ellen was born and raised in the First Nations territory in British Columbia's rural northern interior. Growing up in this spectacular place sparked a lifelong interest in environment. With an academic background in environmental studies as well as landscape architecture, Ellen's work as a registered professional planner is focused on public land use and environmental policy. In her role with Niagara Parks, Ellen leads the environmental planning team, overseeing the environmental stewardship of the 1,325 hectares of Niagara Parks lands. She spends much of her recreation time outdoors, enjoying hiking and gardening. Corey has turned his love for the outdoors into a successful career as a wildlife ecologist. He has worked with numerous government agencies, organizations, educational institutions, and industry partners, acquiring millions of dollars in funding support for these initiatives. In January of 2012, Corey joined Niagara Parks, contributing to its mandate of protecting the natural heritage of the Niagara River corridor. In his current role as project manager of forest health, Corey oversees various wildlife conservation and ecotourism related initiatives, including the sustainable management of Niagara Parks natural areas, trails, species at risk, and aquatic habitats. So a big thank you to all three of you for joining us tonight. And one little housekeeping note to our viewers at home. If at any time you have a question for any one of our panelists, please feel free to click on the little chat box that you have on your screen, and you can ask your question in there, and our amazing moderator, Amanda Smits, will pass that along to our panelists. So now I will turn the reins over to you, Ryan, Corey, and Ellen, and thank you so much for joining us.
Heather, thanks so very much for that extraordinary, generous, and warm welcome. And Corey and Ellen, I so look forward to this panel. Brooke, I couldn't be more proud of your work, and I think you've illuminated really the richness of environmental stewardship in this entire region of Niagara. And the panel portion for this evening's event, we really want to build on that. And I think it, in a really exciting way, complements the breadth that Brooke shared with us in terms of giving us a chance to really dig into the richness and the depth of stewardship activities right here in Niagara Parks. I'm absolutely privileged to be asked to be the moderator for tonight's panel. And as a moderator, I have two main responsibilities. First and foremost, I get to craft a few of my own questions, and in doing so, I really tried to think through how can I ask questions of Ellen and Corey that really illuminate, the important aspects of what they do in Niagara Parks around environmental stewardship. And this is like being a kid in a candy store. I mean, I get the opportunity to fire questions that I've had rummaging around in my mind at both Ellen and Corey. But equally important to that, as a moderator tonight, and Heather mentioned this, I have a chance to also communicate your questions to Ellen and Corey that you might have. And so what I want you to do is, as you'll see in your screen, there's a box there where you can type into anytime you have questions at all, please throw them into that box. And after we have a few warm-up questions that I've thought out, we're going to convey those to Ellen and Corey. So with all that said, I think we're ready to go. Ellen and Corey, how are you feeling? Are you ready to go for the panel?
Let's go.
We got thumbs up all around. Fantastic. So the first thing for me, when I started thinking about our panel tonight and prepping for tonight, I actually thought back to my childhood, and I'm an Ontario kid, grew up in Ontario, and of course the in thing to do, and all school children, I don't know if it was part of the Ontario curriculum at the time, was it was mandatory, you had to visit Niagara Falls. And so, you know, as a kid, the parents had to take Niagara Falls, and then the schools had to take Niagara Falls. And really, it wasn't until I started my post-secondary education at Lake Erie University in outdoor recreation, parks, and tourism that, you know, I actually started to learn about the rich history that Niagara Parks had around stewardship. And, you know, that was really intriguing for me because, of course, as a kid, I visited the site. But it was really only when I joined Brock University in 2000 that I kind of became aware of just how integral environmental stewardship was to Niagara Parks. So, you know, kind of this reflective trip down memory lane, if you will, that I had, leads me to my first question, and that is, you know, what does environmental stewardship or sustainability mean at Niagara Parks, and why is it so important? And I don't know who wants to tackle that one first, but that's my first question.
So I'll start. You know, I think environmental stewardship for Niagara Parks, you know, it's really an honor and tremendous responsibility. It goes to the heart of, you know, Niagara Parks Commission. You know, its very first mandate was the preservation of the beauty, the natural beauty around the falls, and then it expanded to be the entire river corridor. You know, we have some of the most significant and precious lands along the, you know, southern Ontario border in Canada. So, you know, we have the Niagara Gorge, which is an area of natural and scientific interest. And we, you know, part of the biosphere reserve, that's the Niagara Escarpment, and many areas in between and along the shoreline. So, you know, it just, we have a responsibility because of this unique habitat. And I think that, you know, it's one that's very important because of those unique habitats. And we're in a unique position to help to make them prosper and restore them and be stewards of them.
If I can add to that.
What about yourself? You want to take a shot at this one too?
Yeah, I like this one. I like this question because I think you can ask anybody at the park and they have a different answer. And I think for me, it kind of comes from my career. I've always had a love for the outdoors. I've always been fascinated by how can you encourage people to enjoy it, respect it, but at the same time manage it for habitat. And like Ellen pointed out, our mandate is to protect the natural heritage of the Niagara River corridor. And really we want to be able to, at the same time, share this with the world. And how do we encourage people to come out, but at the same time mitigating the risk of that or the impacts. So again, promoting those trail uses and staying on trails and stuff like that. At the same time, really, we want to be sustainable, that when we manage our lands, that we're resilient. So we know the climate's changing, we have invasive species coming, there's always going to be new threats. So how do we manage our land sustainably that keeps it intact? We really want to kind of keep it for another 135 years and more. So I think for us, it's keeping our management sustainable, being leaders in industry and tourism, and showcasing really the natural beauty we have. So thank you.
That's fantastic. I guess I was curious about you know, some of the projects. Maybe we'll get into some of those in the next line of questioning here. So for myself, you know, and this is funny, I don't want to downplay the importance of the falls. I'm not like, you know, part of an anti-falls contingent or anything like that. But, you know, growing up in Ontario, I only heard about Niagara Falls. And what I've, you know, obviously, you know, have a deep affinity for the environment. My entire career has been dedicated towards it. And I think all too often, for me at least, you know, Niagara Falls itself really kind of overshadows many of of the special features that Niagara Park has, which you both spoke to and described in detail, and certainly I've had a chance to become familiar with. I think there's so many really important reasons that we need to focus on environmental stewardship and sustainability in Niagara Parks. So, one of the things that for me has been just one of the greatest rewards of our partnership together is learning about how you undertake environmental stewardship in Niagara Parks. And so, I think a great question to ask both of you is if you can tell our audience, or maybe elaborate a little bit about how does environmental stewardship actually occur in Niagara Parks. And I'm going to encourage you, maybe there's some personal favorites or highlights that you want to actually illustrate for our audience tonight, because I know I've had the privilege of going on a tour with both of you, and it's just so illuminating of how much work you're actually doing behind the scenes. So, again, my question is, how does environmental stewardship actually occur in Niagara Parks?
So again, if I go first, I'll start with some of the stuff that maybe is, not really as exciting. So the planning side of it, the policy side, which is the piece that I kind of take most of the lead on, and which I find enjoyable. And because it sets the framework, it sets a foundation. As I mentioned, we have this mandate with responsibility of preserving and promoting the natural heritage along the river, in addition to the cultural heritage. And so then how do you put in place some structures that really make that possible? And that's what those policy and the planning pieces that I get to work on, and the plans that we put in place. And so one of those, which Ryan, in partnership with Burant University, was our environmental stewardship action plan. So again, it gives us a framework. It takes this plans that bigger ideas that are set in our overarching strat plan that Niagara Parks has, and refines down to the environmental stewardship ideas, and sets out actionable items that we can then work towards, right? That then can become the projects that are on the ground that people can see and enjoy, and we can, get the physical results from. So I think that's one of the first pieces that people don't really realize, is that there are plans that put in place that allow us to be able to continue to move forward and have a longer term vision, right? So that we can achieve those goals.
So Ellen, I know I'm the moderator and I'm supposed to be somewhat neutral here, but that's really difficult. That's really difficult for me to do, because my PhD actually was in the planning school of rural planning and development, and so I totally understand the planning piece. But at the same time, a lot of our students at Brock and through our partnership, it's about really getting your hands dirty and undertaking some of the action. And so I love how you frame that. The plans kind of set the stage for the actions, and I wonder, maybe Corey, you can take us through some of the ideas about some of the projects and actions. And I heard a vicious rumor leading to tonight that you may actually have some visual cues of some of your top 3 favorite projects that you might actually be able to pull out of your back pocket. So I'm looking forward to that. I heard that as a teacher on it. I was looking at Netflix and they had a trailer on for the series tonight, and that was billed as a big event. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Sure, yeah. So most people don't realize that Niagara Parks has one of the highest concentrations of species at risk, rare plants and animals, rare habitat types. So really, my job is to get the dirty, down and dirty in the grasslands, the water, and really, we say we want to protect species at risk, but we don't want to just protect them. We want to enhance the populations and all these other wildlife species. We are a wildlife corridor for important birds and other wildlife throughout Niagara. Like, for one example, during the wintertime, we have about 10% of the population of a single gull species of the world's population. If we weren't here, that'd be a huge loss for that population. So one of my favorite projects, you kind of putting me on the spot for, is the coastal wetland project we've done with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, we found in 2015, working with them, that we really, populations of fish, the native fish species weren't doing very well. We're missing a lot of habitat along the shoreline. Most of the fish habitat that we call the nearshore habitat had been absent. Any vegetation was gone due to different practices along the shoreline, so hardening the shoreline with rock. And if Heather can play this video. So we talk about sustainability at the same time here. So really this video will be an example of one of our projects, restoration projects. So again, with the Ministry of Natural Resources. So this is a tree that our forestry crew had to take down because it fell in the wind. Then we had the festival lights, so they were able to use it for that. So that was up for a few months. So that's kind of a neat story that we were able to repurpose that tree that had fallen down. But then in our projects, we like to use what we have on site as well. So with emerald ash borer, we lost a lot of trees, these conifers. So the idea is we're anchoring these trees into the actual water. And if you would ask me about 10 years ago if I'd ever be allowed to do this, it'd be a big no. We've had a lot of support from the community, from our commissioners to start doing this kind of habitat restoration, large scale, work with our partners across the river there, the US side. They've done a lot of success. And these fish, a lot of these fish species don't believe in borders. So some will spend part of their life cycle on our side of the river and part on their side of the river. So we really try to work together and identify these special habitats. And I think it's been very successful. We've targeted 7 sites. We've done 6 out of 7 so far. We just finished one today, actually. And we'll do another one this winter. But it's been the positivity I've received from the community, the fishermen, or anglers, I should say, has been enormous. So it's great to see people still accessing the sites. We're not limiting access to the river. But I think, again, it all comes down to that doing things sustainably. So we're protecting our shoreline, we're protecting our fish habitat, we're using things, well, that was decimated by emerald ash borer, really. And it's not just going into a waste pile, it's being used for long-term fish habitat now.
You know, Corey, that's such a cool example, and I love the way Heather was able to give us some visual cues, because I mean, it's hard to even believe when I hear you describe that, if we didn't see the video, how you're actually able to take, you know, trees that have fallen down, or, you know, resources that emerald ash borer have caused, you know, essentially dead trees, and repurpose it. And like you said, growing up working in fisheries, I was always on, you know, the human dimension side of fisheries, and you know, like you said, we never would have been able to do some of these projects years ago. So you mentioned something really important that I want to pick up on, and Ellen, I hope you don't mind if I pick on Corey for a little bit, but you know, you mentioned, Corey, how important the community is, and how, you know, other people are involved in some of these projects. And so I was wondering, is there another project maybe that you know, you can elaborate on kind of who's involved in some of these projects and programs, and how some of this action actually come about? I mean, I know Niagara Parks is kind of taking the lead on many of these things, but I know you're not doing it alone. So I wonder maybe you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so really the reality is that we don't do any of these projects alone. We're not the experts on everything, so we also rely on experts for in their field. So I think another one is interesting. So Niagara Parks has its own stewardship team. We have our environmental planning department led by Ellen. But I think we try to have a theme of environmental stewardship throughout the whole park. So we incorporate a lot of staff as well. So different departments. I wonder if, Heather, you can pull up the Duffer Islands video. So we've had an initiative working with the Conservation Authority, the Renewal Action Plan, Environment Canada. It's to restore shoreline habitat along the whole Niagara River corridor. We do have a goal under our urban forestry management strategy to get at least 75% of the shoreline vegetated, native vegetation. In a lot of cases, we've lost a lot of shoreline, again, due to hardening. And so we try to use different strategies. So this video here is initially, this is at Duffer Islands. We had lost about 5 meters of the shoreline. And we try to avoid just using concrete or large boulders all the time. So this is a product called Shore Socks. And the idea is that it's softening the shoreline. Now, what I like about this project is that these people have never done this before. This is all staff from different departments through Niagara Parks. We had some outside agencies kind of help in that had experience with this product to show us how to do it. You can see here. So again, this is all a big learning curve for these people. Great staff, Niagara Parks. And the idea is that eventually we'll come back and we plant into this. And there's our friends, geese at Duffer Islands. So again, we're trying to naturalize the shoreline, kind of recreate what should have been there, while at the same time providing this access for wildlife and for our visitors. But like to your point, we never do this on our own. And really, the more we get engaged with our community, the more they understand what we're doing, why we do it, then we get that buy-in just to support our cause too.
That's a great example, and I'm going to keep on this line of questioning for a little bit longer, if that's okay. And you know, the comments are starting to flow in from the audience, and you know, Jessica's written, for example, how inspiring these examples are, and how thinking about repurposing some of these materials are just so very inspiring. And it's interesting, Ellen, when I think about your comments about policy and planning, how those frameworks relate and translate then into these actual activities. I love that connection to think about. One of the other comments here early on was about the grasslands or grassy corridors. And so one of our guests, you know, has a question and asked, does environmental stewardship mean keeping areas as natural as possible, or is it just keeping development off the land? And they go on to say, when I think of Niagara Parks, I think of a grassy corridor, the length of the Niagara River. And, you know, for me, and I have to admit, this is where it's tough as a moderator to stay neutral, because, you know, I've had the privilege of working with the two of you, looking at, you know, different ways we come to understand and monitor projects, including, you know, grasslands and grassland restoration. And I think, you know, to this question, and maybe either one of you or both of you can speak to this, you know, this grassland restoration and habitat restoration or coastal restoration more broadly, you know, what's the significance of these projects? Why are they so critically important to take these actions around restoration? And I think to the point of our viewer around grasslands.
Well, and, you know, just to also with the question from the viewer, the idea of, you know, do the, you know, protect the lands from development or restoration, right? So again, Niagara Parks is it's one of the fascinating things about being here and working here we didn't touch on, is that because we're kind of this unique provincial agency that isn't supported by tax dollars. So we have many operations, as you know, many people who come here, they go to the journey behind the falls, or they go to some of our other attractions, or to the golf courses. And those things help fund operations and for the park to be able to do many of the good things that we do and that we're here for, right? So we kind of have to do that balance where we have some development, we have some of those things, and we have a golf course, but we try to balance that out by having, you know, an Audubon certified golf course that doesn't use pesticides, you know, has all kinds of programs in place to support animals and the wildlife and bird habitats, and then supports nearby. There's a project of the grasslands, which Corey can go into, you know, a little bit more detail, that is nearby this golf course, the Legends of the Niagara. And again, that habitat that, I mean, I have a pristine golf course, but right next to it, we're restoring a grassland habitat that will support, you know, bobolink and other species at risk. And so we're trying to create that balance where, yes, we've preserved the lands to prevent development from happening here, and we're restoring habitats, but we're also needing to find a little bit of a balance and maybe be an example to other businesses, other people out here, how you can make money and you can still be good stewards and you can still do good things. They're not necessarily opposed to each other, right?
I love that idea that, you know, somehow we can figure out a way to kind of have the best of both worlds and, you know, try to think about how we balance some of those things out. And Corey, I have to say, it sounds to me like Ellen put you a bit on the spot, that you're supposed to tell us more about this grassland restoration project. So, you know, let's wrap up this question by hearing from you about this grassland restoration project.
Sure. So I think to your point, again, back to the sustainability, managing the park is not necessarily just mowing grass. So we have sites that we know that will support species at risk birds, like Ellen mentioned, bobolink. Really, like a species like that requires a large area, a large chunk of grassland, so a large prairie. So for example, the Chippewa Battlefield Project, we were able to do a plan and receive some funding, and we restored 120 acres of grassland, so it's 50 hectares. And that one, there's a lot of work. It was a fallow field, and that's what happens if you kind of just leave it go, you abandon it, it doesn't really produce what you want. You get a lot of these invasive species, cool season grasses that don't really support any native wildlife. So that one we were able to restore, which is fantastic. And it's really just starting to establish now. It's been about 4 years. But already through our monitoring program, we're finding those species, the target species, nesting there and breeding there. So that's a huge success. And we also have other grasslands. So based on records, we believe the gorge, the upper rim, would have been savanna habitat. So a combination of some trees and then really grassland, which is a really rare habitat in Ontario and in Canada. So we've been at Paradise Grove doing prescribed burns to manage that land, because it was kind of abandoned, became invasive species, dominated, got it back to grass, and now we're actively trying to promote the growth of these savanna habitat, grasses and trees. So Heather, we can pull up, I can speak more about the prescribed burning program we have too. So really, grassland management really depends on prescribed burning. So if you're not familiar, it's really safely using fire to knock back invasive species. And the whole goal of it is to create this blackened land surface, which in the early spring, it kind of uses the sunlight to heat up the ground faster. And the native species will actually thrive in this. At the same time, the invasive species don't like that. And so that's why you get this dense mass. So this example here is our legacy garden at Dunk Gardens. It was planted as a prairie garden. A bit of a challenging site to manage because it's right beside the Butterfly Conservatory. And it's just some other sensitive natural features there. But our team, so we have about 20, 25 staff members now trained to perform these burns. And it's, again, it's a different way of managing the land. It's better, it's more effective than mowing. It changes the land, the features significantly. And a lot of times we found where without adding any plant material, so without putting seed down, the seed bank's already there. So by burning off the invasive species, creating that proper conditions for grassland, we're actually getting these native species come up. So it's really fascinating, the progress we've made over the last 12, 13 years. And that's why we want to keep, so that Chippewa Battlefield site, we want to keep, that's how we'll burn that site as well. It'll be our biggest burn site. So I know we're really excited to start that one.
I mean, I think you use the word fascinating, and that's the only word, like when I see that video footage, I've watched it time and time again, and I can't imagine, like, if you're in the Butterfly Conservancy and all of a sudden people are showing up and they're putting fire on the grassland, you know, that's very counterintuitive, right? To what you think is a good idea, but it's, you know, to hear you explain it, it makes an awful lot of sense. So, you know, I have some more questions, but the questions are flooding in from the audience. So if the two of you are comfortable, I'd much rather throw away some of my questions, and I want to maximize our time for the audience. Are the two of you okay with that as panelists?
Sure.
Sure, yeah, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so the first one, I think, Ellen, really is directed at you, and Linda asked, to what extent does planning currently take into consideration changes to the environment that will be caused by climate change?
So we have actually, we're starting to work on a climate adaptation plan, again, with our lovely partners, Brock University, are helping with a project on that. I mean, this, again and again, you'll hear us talk about our partnerships and how important it is. And it really is fundamentally important to be able to move ahead with these things. So climate change is at the center of a lot of what we're thinking about right now. And it is shaping how we're planning for the future. What kind of things should we be doing as far as just even operationally? Does it change our winter maintenance activities? Does it change, from our environmental stewardship perspective, the species that are going to thrive and survive here in the future? what type of other invasive materials and plants and animals come into the landscape that we then have to manage. Are we going to get more frequent storm events? These are all things that do come into our planning, not just on the stewardship side, but also overall with many of the things that operationally Niagara Parks has to do, and we do help with that. No, you're muted there, Ryan.
I was just saying thanks, Ellen, and I want to just take a second and ask our audience, or remind our audience, if you have any questions for Ellen and Corey about something you've heard or something you've always wondered about, environmental stewardship in Niagara Parks, please type it into the box there, and we'll get your question for our panelists. And the next question, Corey, comes from Alice, and I think it's a perfect question for you. Are changes in forest biodiversity being monitored?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one. We with this much area, this much land, but we are actively, we have a forestry department, several arborists, and we're constantly monitoring. We have it all broken down to sections, natural areas versus, say, the boulevards, we call it, the central parks. So we're monitoring our canopy cover, the invasive species cover. We're trying to restore those areas. We're looking at areas that we can restore. We do bio inventories semi-regularly. So that really helps us. Like for areas like the Niagara Glen, we have a lot of data, and we're trying to collect data from our other sites as well. And again, we're really sensitive about introducing new species to those sites. So we have a lot of horticulture in the Parks Department, but we also, when it comes to those sites, we really are sensitive. We try to propagate seed from those sites directly and put them back into that same site. So it is something we're monitoring. Monitoring is always a challenging piece. Again, just given the scale of what Niagara Parks is, but yes.
I want to kind of build on both of those two questions from our audience members while the audience is putting in some other questions. And I guess I was really reflecting on, so what? Where do we go from here? And as a sustainability scientist, we think all the time about social and ecological systems and complexity and change. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. And how do we navigate a future space? And so I think that the most challenging thing anyone can ask you right now is, if you did have a crystal ball, what do you think the future would hold? And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your dreams and hopes and aspirations for the future of environmental stewardship at Niagara Parks. Where do you see it headed? What are some of the biggest things on the horizon? Where do you see it going in the future? I mean, you're both part of making it a reality, right? Charting that future. So what are your dreams? What are your hopes?
You first, Corey?
Yeah. I think in the future of environmental stewardship, I think it's only going to be more important with the changing climate. I think we're going to see habitats changing. There's going to be new threats, but I think it's how we address those threats will change, including our partners, really getting that research like we've been so fortunate to have with Brock, getting some of that data we never had before. And even just how do people interact with the lands and how they feel about the land that we're managing here. So I think for me, if we can continue on the path we are, make our habitats more resilient. I know, like we saw with Emerald Ash Borer, we lost huge amount of trees and forest habitat. We don't want that mistake to happen again. So again, it's diversifying what we're doing. We have our urban forestry management strategy to kind of guide us for the next 10 years and beyond. And I think if we keep following those kind of paths, I think we'll be okay. Ellen, you have more to add to that?
Well, I think you touched on like the idea of the continuing to forge new partnerships, to build and strengthen the relationships with partnerships that we already have, connecting with their community. I think those networks are going to be even more important in the future for all kinds of the resiliency for climate change, to be able to continue to not just be resilient, but how much we learn and understand more by those partnerships, right? So one of the components that I would really am looking forward to and wanting to build on is that we really have just started just the beginning, fledgling, building better relationships with our Indigenous partners, especially around the environmental stewardship and caring for the lands, and really understanding, you know, and tapping into that knowledge network that we have not really done so yet at Niagara Parks. Anyway, that's a whole vast area of understanding that we haven't even looked at, right? The idea of seeing the world differently and seeing the processes differently is something I'm really looking forward to, because I think that is the future for us at Niagara Parks.
You know, I'm inspired to hear that vision, and I feel like we, you know, as residents of Niagara, are on a good trajectory. Just listening to the two of you, and I love how, you know, your vision of where this goes in the future really meets Brooke's research and empirical base in Niagara, and how, you know, stewardship, there's kind of this groundswell, right, of efforts right here in Niagara to, you know, keep what we have so special. The audience is chipping in all kinds of comments now, so let me just get to a few of them. The first one, I think, wow, there's all kinds of great questions. Let's start with June's. This one's for you, Corey. So the control of burn of the grasslands was really interesting. Do you actually have photos of the burn before and after it's grown?
Yeah, it's something we keep a lot of records of all of our projects, actually. Before and after are my favorite ones. But then with the prescribed burns, you can see progression over 5 years and then beyond. It usually takes about 3 years to really establish. Then you start burning it and it just takes off. So it's amazing. Yeah.
That's really cool. Is there any way, and so we'll post, right, tonight's event, which we always do, but is there any way we could maybe get a few of those photos so we can share with June and our other guests what some of that looks like? That would be awesome. So June, we'll make sure we include that in the materials from tonight, so you can have a look at those photos. And another question coming to you, Corey, from Alice is, you know, she certainly says thank you, and she wonders, do you still have the 1 hectare forest plots? This must be something in the inside. I didn't even know you had 1 hectare forest plot, so that shows my ignorance. But go ahead.
Yeah, so we do have them. The monitoring has been inconsistent, I'd say. So the reality is that the land wasn't always ours. So part of it's Parks Canada land. So it's been kind of transferred over. So we are working on getting that reestablished. But yeah, so that's within our Paradise Grove site. So it is something we want to get back onto.
Wonderful. The next one, I'm not sure who wants to tackle this one, but Linda has a great question, and curious about what's in the works with regards to preserving and protecting habitat for bats living in gorge walls. What testing is done to determine if endangered species are present? Corey has a big smile on his face, so I think that might mean he wants Ellen to take it, or it might mean he wants to take it. I don't know how to interpret it.
No, I think I could definitely take this one. It's something that has been on our radar a lot in the last, let's say, dececade.
I like that pun, radar with the bats, though, Corey. That was a good one.
Just for you. So we actually do have our own monitors, so acoustic monitors. We're working with our partners at the Ministry of Environment. So we've been doing a lot of monitoring within the gorge by the falls. The reality was just no information available. Like no one really knew what was around here. And even the Conservation Authority, they've been doing some monitoring as well. So we're starting to understand, get a better idea of sense of what species are here, what, if any, hibernacular are around. So it does play a critical role. Any kind of proposals we get, it all gets incorporated, what species are around. So definitely bats are one of our top priorities to understand where they are and how we can continue to protect them. So.
Yeah, I mean, I find it so fascinating, and I think our viewers this evening also find it so fascinating that so much of what you're doing is, you know, really pioneering in this space. You know, we at least in my initial comments, you know, growing up in Ontario, hearing about Niagara Parks, you know, you don't necessarily think of these things, but there's such unique ecological features that you know you're able to do pioneering work on, and I think the bat example is a great one. Another question, and I think this question is for both of you. Lauren asked, what are the impacts of actions for environmental sustainability at Niagara Parks? So what impacts are you actually having on all the work you're talking about? And how do you actually measure that you're making progress towards sustainability?
Well, okay, so some of the impacts, there's the physical impacts that we're seeing that, with some of the examples that Corey was giving, where we actually can see where restoration projects along the shoreline have taken place. And again, I think it's a great idea. We can post some of those photos so that there are photos from those first shoreline restoration projects and what they look like today. And it's quite amazing. So there's some physical things that you can see right there. There's monitoring, as Corey was saying, that helps us measure that. We have some performance indicators that we're trying to get. So measuring the canopy coverage. So we're doing planting to replace the ash trees. We have standards for what percentage of native plantings we want. And so we're tracking all of those things. Is there anything else, Corey, that you're...
Well, I think another good one to point out is the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan for the area concern. So like at one time, the Niagara River is one of the most polluted water bodies in North America. So Niagara Parks, not by ourselves, obviously, but we've contributed a lot of the efforts to restore the habitat. And some of our targets align directly with those targets to, again, shoreline vegetation, so that really improves water quality, provides habitat, it decreases sediment and into the water. So I think we've already seen the impact this work has had within the last 20 years even on the water quality from Niagara River as well. So
I love hearing these examples. And again, I mean, growing up in this area, I mean, when, I don't want to date myself. I always get in trouble for that. But, I remember some of those days and just knowing where we've gotten to, like you said, with the example of the Niagara River, what a tremendous change we've had. Alexandra asked, how can Niagara community help to support the initiatives at Niagara Parks? I think that's a great question, and it really builds on Brooke's work too, and saying, we have all these stewards that are interested, right? I think of our students at Brock University. I know, through experiential education, they're interested. So maybe you could both elaborate a little bit on what can the Niagara community do to help?
I think for us, one of the key pieces would be the monitoring piece. So the long-term monitoring, engaging the citizen scientists out there, use their expertise. We've seen through the work through Brock even, like how successful that kind of work can be done. A little bit of education goes a long way as far as what we're looking for. And then we can track these things from year to year. Again, we don't always have the capacity in-house, so the more people, the more eyes we have, the better.
I think the other thing too is that when people, and hopefully through some of the other, kind of educational things that we do, like this type of event or other things, if people start to learn about invasive species and then in their own properties here in Niagara, really, if people don't plant some of the things that then can escape into the wild, like Norway maples or, Phragmites, which is a type of ornamental grass that now we see everywhere in the wetland areas. Those things very directly help support not just Niagara Parks stewardship activities, but everywhere across Niagara, every natural, like the Conservation Authority and even the municipalities, what they're trying to do. So that's a good one that's very easy for most people to start to think about in their homes. Planting native plants in their gardens. Those are the kinds of things that also help us.
I mean, I know you're a passionate gardener, Ellen, and I love how you work gardening in there. That was excellent. And this is I think a really important point as we go forward, because I know through our partnership and through Niagara Parks, there's an emphasis on engaging the Niagara community, and citizens in this stewardship effort. It's beyond any of us. And I think those examples that you both gave are really inspiring to get us to start thinking about what can we do, in our own garden, in our own yard, in our own house, and then we can broaden that out. we have a comment from Jocelyn, and she writes, it's great to hear about all the progress. I think this is a really interesting anecdote. 20 years ago, the first riparian buffer project set up in Fort Erie couldn't be called a buffer, so it had to be called the Goose Management Project. And I wasn't involved in the goose management project, but she goes on to say it's nice to see the snowball efforts and your efforts are paying off. And maybe that's a really important. I think that's an important and appropriate kind of place to maybe close up our panel tonight. I mean, let's build on that, and I want to ask you both kind of if you could offer maybe a final comment to all of our viewers out there about, in terms of your time with Niagara Parks and what you see change, what's kind of the big take-home message that you would take based on your experiences, and what message would you like to leave our viewers with?
To get involved and to, continue to do things to learn about where they can make connections, to come out and enjoy the lands here in Niagara Parks. You'll see it now maybe in a different light. As you're cycling along the rec trail, maybe you'll see some of the habitat sites along the shoreline and, gain a different understanding of that, and tell your friends about those habitats and that kind of work. That's what I kind of like to leave people with thinking about.
Thanks, Ellen. Corey, what about you? A final closing thought?
The same idea is come out and experience the natural areas we have, the natural features, and hopefully gain a new appreciation for what we're doing, and also to protect this habitat. So we're always looking for help, and we welcome any expertise as well. So again, it's there to enjoy. We gotta do it responsibly.
I think those are two wonderful sentiments to end tonight's panel on. I want to, as a moderator, extend my personal thanks, and thanks on behalf of all the viewers to the two of you for being our panelists tonight and sharing your wealth of experience with Niagara Parks, and also being so open and transparent about, some of the good as well as the challenges. And I love this opening warm spirit about come on out, get involved, be part of it, whether you're a student, whether you're a resident, and we can all help each other out through it. It's just fantastic. And some of the feedback that we're getting here from our viewers, I want to share, and that's, just thanks for this informative, inspiring series. Look forward to future sessions. Definitely be tuning in. So, the messages are resonating, and we're getting a number of thank yous coming in. I also want to thank Brooke, certainly, for taking the time to share her work and research and knowledge with us. I think together we've really been able tonight to convey, the extent to which active stewardship is occurring, what the breadth of that is right here in our region in Niagara, as well as a bit more about the depth of what goes on in Niagara Parks and the environmental stewardship side of things. So it's just been a wonderful night, and I really feel privileged to be part of it. In terms of closing remarks, I want to also take just a minute of your time. I think it's always really important to acknowledge and say thank you to the team that makes these events possible. What you see on screen is a small segment of the actual team and effort and people that go into each and every one of these events. And so I want to just say thank you to the amazing group of students, staff that make all of this possible. It could never happen without you. And last but not least, I want to encourage you to please join us for our next event on October 28th, where our speaker series is going to focus on ecosystem restoration challenges faced by Parks Canada. And so again, that's same time, same location, and it's October 28th. And we look so very forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.